I didn't expect a medal for giving up my 20s to raise my brother. Just a nod, a seat at the front. But as the wedding march played, the woman holding his arm wasn't me. It was the mother who abandoned us to freeze in a trailer 16 years ago. I spent 45 minutes trying to scrub the smell of fryer grease out of my cuticles before I finally gave up. It was a useless battle anyway. The grease was practically part of my DNA now, baked into the ridges of my skin after 14 years at a diner just off the interstate. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in my cramped apartment, staring at my hands. They were the hands of a much older woman, knuckles thick, skin dry, and mapped with tiny, pale scars. The worst one from 2015, when I reached too fast for a slipping basket of fries because Leo needed $50 for a middle school field trip, and I couldn't afford to lose my shift over a dropped order. I grabbed a bottle of cheap drugstore lotion, aggressively massaging it into my palms. It smelled like artificial lavender and alcohol. It didn't hide the grease. Nothing did. Today was Leo's wedding day. My little brother, the kid I had taught to tie his shoes, whose vomit I had caught in my bare hands at 3 a.m., whose college tuition I had scraped together dollar by dollar, tip by tip. He was 24 now, marrying a girl named Madeline, whose family owned a string of car dealerships and a house with actual pillars in the front. I smoothed down the skirt of my dress. I'd bought it off a clearance rack at a department store 3 towns over. It was a dark, muted navy, safe, unoffensive, the kind of dress a shadow wears. The fabric felt scratchy against my collarbone, a cheap polyester blend trying desperately to pass as chiffon. It cost me $89, which meant I'd eaten peanut butter on saltines for dinner the last 2 weeks, but I didn't care. I wanted to look nice. I wanted to look like I belonged, even if I knew, deep down, I never would. The drive to the venue took 2 hours. My 2008 Honda Civic rattled the entire way, the air conditioning blowing a pathetic, lukewarm breeze that smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. I kept the windows rolled up anyway, terrified of ruining the tight curls I'd spent an hour plastering to my scalp with a heavy coat of hairspray. The summer heat radiated through the windshield, baking my legs through the thin navy fabric. I practiced my smile in the rearview mirror. It felt stiff, fraudulent. I loved Leo. I loved him with a ferocity that scared me, a protective rage that had kept us alive when we had nothing. But I was cynical enough to know how this wedding was going to play out. Madeline's family, the affluent, polished crowd, would look at me with polite, thinly veiled pity. They knew the backstory, the tragic orphans. Madeline had called me so brave the first time we met, a glass of Pinot Grigio in her perfectly manicured hand. I hated being called brave. Brave implies a choice. I didn't have a choice when our mother walked out the door with a trash bag full of her clothes and never came back. I just did what had to be done. The GPS directed me off the highway and onto a winding, private road lined with ancient, weeping willows. The air immediately felt different here. Cooler. Expensive. The venue was a sprawling estate called the Glass House, an architectural marvel of steel and curved glass sitting on acres of manicured botanical gardens. I pulled up to the entrance. A valet in a crisp white shirt and black vest stepped forward. I killed the engine, the car giving a violent shudder before dying. The valet opened my door. He didn't blink at the rusted door hinge, but I felt a hot flush of shame crawl up my neck anyway. "Welcome, ma'am," he said smoothly. "Thanks," I muttered, handing him the keys. I tipped him a $5 bill, too much for my budget, but I felt an absurd need to prove I wasn't entirely destitute. The crunch of the pristine white gravel under my scuffed heels sounded deafening. I walked toward the grand entrance, my cheap clutch squeezed tight beneath my arm. The air smelled of crushed eucalyptus and something rich roasting in a kitchen far away, thyme maybe, or brown butter. It didn't smell like survival. It smelled like a world I had only seen in magazines left behind by diner patrons. I told myself to breathe. This is for Leo. He had made it out. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo today, marrying into a family that would ensure he never had to check a bank balance before buying groceries. I had won. I had done my job. So why did my chest feel so tight? Why did every step toward those massive glass doors feel like walking toward an execution? The blast of air conditioning that hit me as I stepped inside was freezing, raising goosebumps on my bare arms. The foyer was immense, a cavern of white marble and cascading floral arrangements. White hydrangeas and pale pink peonies spilled over tall golden vases. The chatter of early arrivals echoed off the high ceilings, a low, melodic hum of wealth. A young woman holding a clipboard and wearing a headset intercepted me. Her smile was practiced, her eyes scanning me, taking in the off-the-rack dress, the stiff hair, the lack of a designer label. "Good afternoon. Are you here for the Hayes Montgomery wedding?" she asked, her voice bright and hollow. "Yes. I'm Nora Hayes, the groom's sister." I stood a little taller, waiting for the flicker of recognition. The sister. The one who raised him. The VIP. The girl frowned slightly, her manicured finger dragging down the list on her clipboard. "Hayes, Hayes. Ah, yes, Nora Hayes. Welcome. The ceremony will be out in the conservatory in 20 minutes. If you'd like to find your reception seat first, the chart is just over there by the champagne tower." She didn't offer a corsage. I looked down at her hands. Usually, the immediate family received a flower to pin to their lapel or dress, a marker of importance, a visual cue that said, "I belong to the people up there." Nothing. Is there a corsage for me?" I asked, hating the slight waver in my voice. The girl looked genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, my list only shows florals for the bridal party, the bride's parents, and the mother of the groom." I froze. The mother of the groom. My stomach gave a slow, sickening lurch. "The mother of the groom?" I repeated, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. "Yes, ma'am. If you'll just step through those doors, the ushers can direct you." She gave a dismissive nod and turned to greet an older couple walking in behind me, reeking of expensive cedarwood cologne. I walked toward the seating chart, my legs moving mechanically. "It's a typo," I told myself. "A miscommunication with the florist." Madeline's mother probably handled the orders and just checked a standard box. Mother of the groom. It's a placeholder. It means me. The seating chart was a massive pane of frosted glass, names written in elegant, swirling gold calligraphy that was nearly impossible to read. I found the head table. Madeline Montgomery, Leo Hayes, Arthur Montgomery, Eleanor Montgomery, and then a blank space where my name should have been. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked the back of my neck. I scanned the next VIP tables. Table 1, Table 2, the bridal party, the Montgomery extended family. No Nora. I kept reading. Table 5, Table 8. The font began to blur. My pulse thumped dully in my ears, drowning out the string quartet playing softly in the corner. Table 12. Table catters. Nora Hayes. I stared at the gold lettering until it burned into my retinas. Table 14. I looked past the frosted glass into the cavernous reception hall being prepped by staff. Table 14 was pushed toward the back, adjacent to the swinging metal doors of the catering kitchen. It was a table meant for plus ones, awkward co-workers, and distant relatives who were invited out of obligation, not love. A sharp, physical ache bloomed in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I stepped back, bumping into a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes. The glasses clinked dangerously, and I mumbled an apology, my face burning. I had spent my entire youth making sure Leo never felt like an afterthought. I had skipped my own high school graduation to work a double shift so I could buy him a decent suit for his 8th grade dance. I had sat in the freezing cold bleachers of every single one of his track meets, screaming his name until my throat bled, just so he wouldn't look up into the stands and see an empty seat. And he had put me at table 14, next to the kitchen. "Excuse me," an usher, tall and imposing in a black suit, gently touched my elbow. "The ceremony is beginning shortly. We are seating guests in the conservatory." I nodded dumbly. I let him guide me away from the frosted glass. My mind raced, frantically building excuses for Leo. He didn't make the chart. Madeline's mother controlled everything. He's passive. He didn't want to start a fight with his new in-laws. He probably doesn't even know. Yes, that had to be it. Leo was weak when it came to conflict. He always had been. When the landlord used to pound on our apartment door demanding rent, 12-year-old Leo would hide in the closet with his hands over his ears, and I would be the one to open the door, lie through my teeth, and beg for another week. He just didn't want to rock the boat. I clung to that rationalization like driftwood as I walked into the conservatory. The room was stunning. Vaulted glass ceilings revealed a cloudless blue sky. Rows of lucite chairs faced an altar overflowing with white orchids. The air was thick with the humid, sweet scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. It was beautiful, but it felt suffocating. "Bride or groom?" an usher asked at the head of the aisle. "Groom," I said. "I'm his sister." "Ah, wonderful. Right this way." He walked me down the aisle. My spirits lifted slightly. He was taking me to the front. Of course he was. The reception chart was a mistake, a slight by the wedding planner. But for the ceremony, I belonged in the front row. We passed the middle rows. We passed the fifth row, the third row. Then the usher stopped at the second row on the groom's side. He gestured to an empty seat at the far end, right against the aisle, but definitively behind the front row. The front row was entirely empty, save for a single reserved sign placed on the center chair. I looked at the usher, my throat tight. "I'm the only family he has," I whispered. It sounded pathetic. I hated myself for saying it. The usher offered a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile. "I'm sorry, miss. The front row is reserved strictly for the parents of the groom." "Our parents are dead," I said flatly. It was a lie. Our father was dead. Our mother was just gone. But to us, to me, she was dead. The usher shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just following the chart, ma'am. Please take your seat." I sat down. The lucite chair was hard and cold. I stared at the back of the empty chair in front of me, the reserved placard mocking me. I felt like a child who had been scolded and sent to the corner. The anger, the cynical, biting rage that I usually relied on to get through life wasn't there. Instead, there was just a profound, hollowing sadness. The conservatory began to fill. The noise grew louder, a cacophony of rustling silk, clicking heels, and hushed, excited whispers. I sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, gripping my cheap faux pearl clutch so tightly my scarred knuckles turned white. I told myself I would confront him later. Not today. Today was his day. Tomorrow, I would call him. I would demand to know why I had been hidden away like a dirty secret. I would call him. I would call him later, but for now, I would sit in the second row, keep my mouth shut, and watch the boy I raised become a man. The string quartet, tucked away in an alcove of ferns, stopped playing their ambient prelude. A hush fell over the room, immediate and heavy. The air seemed to stand still. Then, the cellist drew a long, resonant note, and they transitioned into a slow, sweeping rendition of a classical march. The ceremony was starting. Guests shifted in their seats, craning their necks toward the entrance. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on the altar. I wanted to see Leo's face when he walked down the aisle. I wanted to see that familiar, nervous twitch in his jaw, the way he always blinked too fast when he was overwhelmed. I wanted to find the boy I knew beneath the expensive tuxedo. The side doors near the altar opened. The officiant stepped out, followed by the groomsmen. They filed into place, a line of polished, identical men. And then came Leo. He stepped out from the side entrance, walking toward the center of the altar to await his bride. My breath caught in my throat. He looked incredible. The tuxedo was midnight blue, tailored to perfection, making his shoulders look broader, his posture straighter. His dark hair was styled, his face clean-shaven. He didn't look like the skinny, terrified kid who used to sleep on the floor of my bedroom because the heater in his room was broken. He looked like he belonged in this glass palace. He looked like money. A swell of pride, pure and painful, rose in my chest. I did that, I thought. I got him here. He took his place at the front, his hands clasped before him. He was scanning the crowd. He was looking for me. I leaned forward slightly, ready to catch his eye, ready to offer him a small, reassuring smile to anchor him. His eyes swept over the groom's side. They passed over the back rows, moved to the middle, and then landed on the front. His gaze didn't drop to the second row. It stayed fixed on the entrance at the back of the aisle. The music swelled, the traditional cue for the groom's parents to be seated before the bridal party entered. I frowned. Usually, if there were no parents, the groom just stood there or the grandparents walked down. I heard a collective gasp of admiration from the guests behind me. The rustle of movement. I turned my head, just slightly, to look over my shoulder. My heart stopped. Literally, physically, the rhythm in my chest seized, leaving a vacuum of cold, dead space in my ribs. Walking down the aisle, escorted by one of the groomsmen, was a woman. She was in her mid-50s, but she looked remarkably preserved. Her hair, which used to be a dull, mousy brown, was now dyed a brilliant, expensive champagne blonde, swept up into an elegant twist. She wore a floor-length gown of shimmering silver, the fabric catching the light with every step. Pinned to her chest, large and undeniable, was a massive white orchid corsage, the mother of the groom. It was Brenda, our mother, the woman who had looked at me 16 years ago when I was 18 and Leo was 8 and said, "I can't do this anymore, Nora. You figure it out." She had walked out of our rusted, drafty trailer in the middle of November, leaving a half-eaten bowl of cereal on the counter and a stack of unpaid electric bills on the table. She hadn't called. She hadn't written. For the first 2 years, every time the phone rang, Leo would run to it, his face lit up with a desperate, pathetic hope that shattered a little more every time it was just a telemarketer. And now, here she was, walking down the aisle at his wedding. The smell hit me before she even reached my row. It was a sophisticated perfume, now heavy on gardenias, masking the faint, stale scent of nicotine that I realized, with a nauseating jolt, was just a ghost memory in my own brain. My vision narrowed. The edges of the room blurred, turning gray. The elegant string music warped in my ears, sounding like a cassette tape being eaten by a stereo. I couldn't move. My hands were paralyzed in my lap. I watched her glide past me. She didn't look at the second row. She was beaming, a tear of manufactured joy glistening on her cheek as she looked at Leo. She reached the front row, the empty seat with the reserved sign. The usher unclipped the rope, and she took her seat with the grace of a queen ascending a throne. I looked at Leo. He was staring at her. His eyes were soft, his jaw relaxed. He looked happy. Then, as if he could feel the sheer force of the violence radiating from my stare, his eyes flicked from Brenda to me. Time suspended. For one agonizing second, Leo looked directly into my eyes. I saw the flash of panic, the guilt, the sudden naked realization of what he had done, and the fact that I was sitting exactly where I could see it all. He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. And then he looked away. He looked away. He shifted his weight, turning his body slightly toward the center aisle, presenting his profile to me. He completely, deliberately erased me from his line of sight. A physical wave of nausea slammed into me. I pressed a hand over my mouth, the cheap faux leather of my clutch digging into my ribs. The room was spinning. The air in the conservatory, heavily perfumed with orchids and hydrangeas, felt suffocating. I couldn't get enough oxygen into my lungs. He hadn't just reconnected with her. He had given her my place. I looked at Brenda's silver gown. I looked at the massive orchid on her chest. I thought about my $89 dress. I thought about the grease under my fingernails, the burns on my arms, the plasma I had sold, the meals I had skipped, the youth I had incinerated to keep him warm. He was ashamed of me. Brenda looked the part. She looked wealthy, polished, acceptable to the Montgomery family. I looked like what I was, the tired, worn-out collateral damage of his survival. The music changed. The bridal chorus began. The crowd stood up. I remained seated. I couldn't have stood if I tried. My legs felt like lead, disconnected from my brain. Around me, A wall of silk dresses and tailored suits rose up, blocking my view of the altar, blocking my view of Brenda, blocking my view of the brother who had just ripped my heart out and handed it to the woman who broke us. I sat in the shadows of the standing guests, shivering uncontrollably in the stifling heat of the glass house. The ceremony continued, but I didn't hear a word. I just stared at the hem of Brenda's silver dress pooling around the legs of her front row chair and waited for the world to make sense again. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the applause erupted like shattered glass. I didn't clap. My hands remained white-knuckled around my clutch. I waited for the aisle to clear, keeping my head ducked, blending in with the other guests as we were herded toward the reception hall. Table 14 was exactly what I expected, only worse. It was so close to the catering kitchen that every time the heavy metal doors swung open, a blast of hot air smelling of roasted garlic, commercial floor cleaner, and stale sweat washed over me. The clatter of industrial dishwashing drowned out the soft jazz playing through the overhead speakers. My table mates were a collection of strays. There was a guy named Greg, an IT contractor from Leo's office, who immediately started talking about his crypto portfolio, and two elderly cousins of the bride who spent the first 20 minutes complaining about the draft. None of them knew who I was. I didn't introduce myself. I stared at the pristine white tablecloth. I traced the woven pattern with a calloused thumb, feeling the heavy, expensive cotton. A waiter reached over my shoulder, pouring a stream of dark red wine into my crystal glass. I picked it up and drank half of it in one swallow. It was dry, tasting of oak and blackberries, leaving a harsh tannic coating on my tongue. It cost more per bottle than my weekly grocery budget, and I hated it. From my vantage point in the culinary crossfire, I had a direct line of sight to the head table. It was a masterclass in picturesque wealth. Madeline looked radiant, laughing with her father. Next to her, Leo sat tall, a relaxed, easy smile on his face. And right beside him, occupying the seat of honor, was Brenda. She was working the room without ever leaving her chair. I watched her lean in to whisper something to Madeline's mother. The two women laughed, touching their champagne flutes together. Brenda reached out and affectionately patted Leo's shoulder. He turned to her, his smile widening. My stomach cramped, a violent, twisting knot of acid and cheap wine. I remembered that hand, the one currently resting so gently on his tuxedo jacket. I remembered it gripping a lit cigarette, pointing at a 10-year-old Leo, telling him to stop crying because he was giving her a migraine. I remembered the heavy, suffocating silence in the trailer the morning after she left, the way the frost crept up the inside of the single-pane windows, and the sheer terror of realizing that if I didn't figure out how to pay the gas bill by Friday, we were going to freeze. They have done a lot of healing, I thought, the phrase echoing in my head like a sick joke. That's what therapists called it, right? Healing. As if abandoning two children to starvation was a simple misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a silver dress and a smile. Is this seat taken? The voice was directly behind me, low, slightly raspy. I stiffened. The fine hairs on my arms stood up. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. The heavy scent of gardenia perfume settled over my shoulders, smothering the smell of the kitchen's roasted garlic. Greg, the IT guy, looked up, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of the mother of the groom gracing our reject table. No, ma'am. All yours. Brenda pulled out the empty chair next to me. The metal legs scraped sharply against the hardwood floor. She sat down, smoothing the shimmering fabric of her skirt over her knees. Up close, the preservation was less convincing. Beneath the expensive foundation, I could see the map of her past, the deep vertical lines around her mouth, the sun damage on her chest, but her eyes were exactly the same, pale, watery blue, the kind of eyes that could look right through you and feel absolutely nothing. It's a beautiful venue, isn't it? She said. Her voice was smooth, conversational, like she was talking to a distant acquaintance in a grocery store checkout line. I stared straight ahead at the centerpieces. What are you doing here, Brenda? She sighed, a soft, practiced exhalation. Nora, don't do this. Not today. Don't do what? I whispered. My throat felt tight, filled with broken glass. Acknowledge reality? I'm his mother, she said, leaning in just a fraction. The smell of Prosecco on her breath mingled with the gardenias, making me nauseous. He tracked me down 6 months ago. He wanted me here. He wanted closure. We've had some very long, very honest talks. I slowly turned my head to look at her. I expected to feel rage. I expected to want to scream, to flip the table, to cause a scene that would get me dragged out by security. But sitting there, looking into the face of the woman who had ruined my life and then casually walked back into the pristine, successful life I had built for her son, I just felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. Honest talks, I repeated, my voice barely a rasp. Did you honestly talk about the time he had a 104-degree fever and I had to carry him 3 miles to the free clinic in the snow because you took the car and our last $20 to go to a casino in Reno? Brenda flinched. Just a tiny, barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. I was sick back then, Nora. I was in a dark place. You know that. I was a teenager, Brenda. I wasn't a mother. But I became one because you were too much of a coward to stay. And you did a wonderful job, she said. The condescension in her tone was like a physical blow. She reached out, her manicured fingers brushing the rough, scarred knuckles of my right hand. Look at him. He's an accountant. He's marrying into a wonderful family. You kept him safe. I'll always be grateful for that. I jerked my hand away as if she had burned me. My chair wobbled precariously. You don't get to be grateful, I hissed, my voice shaking with a tremor I couldn't control. You don't get to thank me for doing your job. You don't get to wear the corsage. Brenda's eyes hardened. The gracious mother of the groom facade slipped, just for a second, revealing the cold, selfish woman I knew. He chose me to sit up there, Nora, not you. Because he doesn't want to be reminded of the trailer park today. He doesn't want to look at you and remember how pathetic we were. He wants to move on. She stood up, smoothing her dress one last time. I'm sorry you couldn't find a better dress, she added softly, her eyes flicking down to my cheap navy polyester. Enjoy the dinner. She turned and glided back toward the head table. I sat completely frozen. The kitchen doors swung open behind me. A busboy rushed past, smelling of bleach. I picked up my wine glass with both hands to hide their violent shaking, and I drained the rest of it. The dinner service was a blur of heavy porcelain and clinking silver. I chewed mechanically, tasting nothing, forcing down pieces of dry chicken and wilted asparagus. I didn't speak to anyone. I just watched the clock on the far wall. I was waiting for the final shoe to drop. It happened right after the plates were cleared. The best man tapped his knife against his champagne flute. The sharp, high-pitched ringing cut through the chatter. The room settled into an expectant hush. After the best man delivered a predictable, mildly raunchy speech that had the Montgomerys chuckling politely, the microphone was handed to Leo. He stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked incredibly handsome, bathed in the soft, warm light of the chandeliers. Thank you, everyone, Leo said, his voice echoing through the PA system. He had lost his nervous stutter years ago. I had paid for the speech therapy that fixed it. Madeline and I are so incredibly grateful you could all be here to celebrate with us. He looked down at Madeline, his expression softening. He spoke about her for a few minutes. It was sweet. It was rehearsed. Then he turned his attention to the room. They say it takes a village to raise a child, Leo continued, a slight, self-deprecating smile on his lips. And I certainly needed one. I didn't have the easiest start in life, but I was lucky enough to have people who stepped up. He turned to his right, looking down at Brenda. To my mom, he said. The word hung in the air, Mom. Not Brenda, Mom. We had our rough patches, Leo said, his voice thickening with manufactured emotion. But you found your way back to me. You showed me that people can change, that love can forgive, and that family is always family. Having you here today, beside me, means the world. I love you, Mom. Brenda dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin. Arthur Montgomery patted her shoulder. The room erupted into warm, approving applause. A beautiful narrative of redemption. I stared at my empty wine glass. My heart wasn't beating. It was just a dull, bruised weight sitting at the bottom of my rib cage. And, Leo continued, the applause dying down. He shifted his weight, looking out toward the back of the room, toward the kitchen doors, toward table 14. I also want to thank my sister, Nora. He squinted, trying to locate me in the dim lighting. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't move. Nora, thanks for keeping the lights on when things got dark, he said. He offered a quick, casual smile, literally and figuratively. We appreciate you coming today. That was it. Thanks for keeping the lights on. Like I was a janitor. Like I was a reliable appliance he had outgrown. 14 years of my life, my entire youth, my chance at college, my credit score, my health reduced to a punchline about a utility bill. He raised his glass. To the Montgomerys, for welcoming me into your family. Cheers. Cheers, the room echoed. I didn't pick up my glass. I finally understood. Leo wasn't a victim of Brenda's manipulation. He was just like her. He was a survivor, and survivors do whatever it takes to adapt to their environment. When we were freezing and starving, he clung to me because I was the only fire in the room. But now? Now he was in a glass palace. He was surrounded by wealth, status, and ease. I was a reminder of the dirt he crawled out of. Brenda, with her new money and her dyed hair, fit the narrative. She was the tragic, redeemed mother. I was just the embarrassing, grease-stained sister who didn't know how to dress for a country club wedding. He didn't want to be reminded of the blood on the floor. He just wanted to enjoy the view. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs screeched against the floor, loud and harsh, but the sound was drowned out by the renewed chatter of the room. I stood up. I didn't look at the head table. I didn't look back at the kid I had raised. I picked up my $89 clutch and walked out. The air outside the glass house was thick and humid, a heavy summer night that smelled of cut grass and asphalt. The silence was immediate and absolute, a stark contrast to the suffocating noise of the reception. I walked down the crushed white gravel path to the valet stand. The same young man in the black vest was standing there, looking bored. "Ticket, ma'am?" he asked. I handed him the crumpled slip of paper. I stood alone in the glow of the estate's gas lanterns, hugging my arms across my chest. A few minutes later, the violent, hacking roar of my 2008 Honda Civic shattered the quiet of the botanical gardens. The valet pulled it up, leaving the engine running. It sounded like it was choking on its own exhaust. "Thank you," I said. I didn't have another $5 to tip him. I got into the driver's seat. The fabric of the seat was worn thin, smelling faintly of the diner and old coffee. It smelled like my life. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the glass house. I didn't check the rearview mirror. I drove down the winding willow-lined road, out through the massive iron gates, and merged onto the desolate stretch of highway heading back to my cramped, overheated apartment. About 10 miles down the road, I pulled over at a flickering neon-lit gas station. I put the car in park and killed the engine. I sat in the silence for a long moment. Then, I reached down and unbuckled my cheap, uncomfortable heels, tossing them into the passenger footwell. I rubbed my hands over my face, pressing my palms against my eyes until I saw stars. I brought my hands down and rested them on the steering wheel. The artificial lavender lotion had completely worn off. I held them up in the dim, greenish light of the dashboard. The knuckles were thick. The skin was scarred. And deep in the ridges, if I looked closely enough, I could still see the faint, dark shadow of grease. They weren't the hands of a woman who belonged at a head table. They weren't smooth or elegant or capable of wearing a massive white orchid. They were the hands of a fighter. They were the hands that had built a man from nothing, even if that man had decided he no longer needed the architect. I took a deep breath. The air in the car was stale, but for the first time all day, my lungs expanded fully. The tight, agonizing knot in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a strange, hollow lightness. I was 32 years old. I had no savings, a terrible job, and a car that was one pothole away from the scrapyard. But the debt was paid. The kid was raised. I didn't owe him, or the ghost of our mother, another damn second of my life. I turned the key, the engine coughed, sputtered, and finally caught, settling into its familiar, rattling hum. I put the car in drive, pulled back onto the empty highway, and drove into the dark, alone and completely free. If Nora's raw and heartbreaking reality resonated with you, don't let her story stop here. We all know someone who gave everything only to be left in the shadows. Hit that like button to show your support for the unseen heroes. Share this video with a friend who appreciates deeply human stories, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping, realistic dramas every week. Your support helps us tell the stories that matter. See you next time.